And Iran has ramped up the threats towards Israel and says any invasion of Lebanon would trigger what it called obliteration. Well, to talk about all of that, we're joined by Behnam Ben Taleblu, Senior Fellow at the FDD, the Foundation for the Defence of Democracy. It's good to see you, Behnam, as always. Let's start with the election then, because turnout was being touted as a key marker of how much support there still is for the regime. We don't have an official figure, I believe, but was it lower than the clerical regime had predicted?
It's a pleasure to be with you. In essence, yes, it's been much lower than the regime predicted. You had some semi-official polling talking about high 40s, low 50s, which would be, again, game-changing given the trend in the past decade that we've seen in the rise of street protests, as well as the rise in the boycotts of elections, whether they're parliamentary elections, Assembly of Experts elections, or even presidential elections. The election that this round was supposed to replace, which was former President Ibrahim Raisi from 2021, he had the lowest ever record for presidential election turnout. Now that's been surpassed by this first round here. And in the second round, if you had to ask me, this will be the regime engineering something to continue its hard right drift and consolidating power, where a high turnout doesn't buy you legitimacy, it buys you deterrence. So that's why they're trying to tout a higher turnout than may actually be reported.
Right, and then we're now on the brink of a nail-biting second round runoff vote with a lot of suspense. We've got an ultra-conservative on one side and a so-called reformist on the other. Is that a coincidence?
I don't necessarily see it as a coincidence, and sometimes with the Islamic Republic past this prologue, the regime's hardline factions and deep state establishment has often tried to use the prospect of a hardline candidate winning to generate more turnouts, to give the Iranian people the allegation or the potential thought that they can actually indeed change things with participation through the ballot box, even though that hasn't happened. And then the government will use that higher turnout in round two to signal legitimacy, to bolster deterrence, and then continue to drag the system to the hard right. That is exactly what happened in 2005 with the first time that former Holocaust denier-in-chief Mahmoud Ahmadinejad entered the presidency. So in that sense, past may quite well be prologue here.
What about Masoud Pezeshkian then? And there's been a lot of articles, profiles of him in the Western media. Is he truly a moderate? Could he bring some sort of reform?
You know, these labels are very much relative, but if you look at his views on the United States, you look at his views on Israel, and you look at what he's trying to do, as well as what he can do within the confines of the governing system of the Islamic Republic of Iran, that person will not be able to make substantive changes, whomever the president is. And in this sense, a lot of the hyper-focusing on the bios of the candidates and the puff pieces on the legacy of someone like Pezeshkian just tells you one thing. The Islamic Republic has always been able to narrow the political system such that yesterday's moderate, yesterday's hardliner is today's self-styled reformist. And that's exactly what the political contraction that's been happening behind the scenes, and then sometimes quite publicly with disqualifications of people like Larijani, someone whom the Western media had likened to the Kennedys of Iran, tells you about the governing structure in the Islamic Republic. So this tells me more about the West's over-focus on certain things and misunderstanding of the things that matter in the regime.
OK, let's talk about these latest threats then out of Tehran. Complete obliteration if Israel moves into Lebanon to fight its major proxy, Hezbollah. How do you interpret those comments?
You know, Hezbollah, which is to Israel's north, is not all like Hamas, which is to Israel's south, even though they all fit into the regime's larger axis of resistance strategy, which, as we've seen both pre and post October 7, is designed to politically and, more importantly, militarily inflict the death by 1,000 cuts policy against the sole Jewish state in the region. Hezbollah is really the crown jewel of these proxies. And what Iran is likely to do in attempts to surge and defend this crown jewel of its proxy architecture is probably drastically different than what it will do and has done thus far to defend Hamas, which is probably the lowest of the low-hanging fruit. Hezbollah was created by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps amid the chaos of the Lebanese civil war, whereas Hamas was co-opted among the different fighting strands of the Palestinian movements in the 80s.
Behnam Ben Taleblu, thank you very much indeed. Great to talk to you.
Thank you.